This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me today, I have Dr. Kirsty Graham. How are you?
Hi, yeah, I'm doing pretty well here. It's getting dark earlier and earlier, which is a bit upsetting. It's just past 4 and already dark out, but otherwise I'm doing pretty well today.
This is not related to anthropology at all. Do you have time changes in London or in England?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hate that. It's stupid.
It's wild adjusting to them, and
no.
I would rather not.
Yeah, I'm 100% pro daylight savings time year round, is how I feel. But even if we can't do that, just staying with one year round, I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. I think we're past the point of needing it for many practical reasons.
Yeah. This is probably like this is probably like the most out there political thing I'll ever say on the show. But I think that just like the fact that we exist and we talk about evolution is apparently extreme for some people. So probably not the most extreme political thing I've ever said on the show. But it is something that I'm willing to argue with people about in bars. So
that's a good test.
Well, I'm really super excited to have you here today. I realized I said London. You're not in London. You're just, if you Google, I use London time. Where are you?
So I work remotely. It's part of the joy of having two academics in as a couple, because we're living in Newcastle at the moment, but I work at the University of St. Andrews and my partner's at the University of Durham, and it's kind of in the middle somehow. So work-wise at St. Andrews, physically currently in Newcastle.
Perfect. Well, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I previously talked to you for my cannibalism podcast listeners. That's coming out next year. Get really excited. Dr. Graham is incredible. And because you're so incredible, I wanted to have you back on to talk about what your main topic of research is, which is essentially communication amongst apes, not humans.
And specifically gestures and how they use gestures to communicate, which I think is always fun in like a podcast format, because I'm gesturing and trying to like do the gestures, but also describe them in a way that's meaningful to your audience.
Yeah, I was up late last night reading articles, and one of the things that was interesting to me is kind of like the breadth of species that you look at. I know that you like specialize in bonobos, but like you really look at basically all the great apes.
Yeah, and that's really important too. Like historically, we've really focused on chimpanzees as the model for our last common ancestor, but bonobos are equally related to humans as chimpanzees are. Like bonobos and chimpanzees only diverged as a species around 1 million years ago. So, I mean, neither of them is a perfect model for our last common ancestor. But by studying both of them and other great ape species, we might get some approximation of what our human and like pan or other great ape common ancestors might have been like and how they might have behaved.
It just occurred to me that I don't think we've ever discussed on the show kind of like the relatedness and like what exactly an ape is. So pretend this is Intro to Biological Anthropology 101. Can you give like a brief overview?
Yeah, so, oh my goodness, I have to think about this now. I guess because, I mean, it comes down to species not being real, doesn't it? But being a useful category for us as scientists and researchers to think about. So apes are generally tailless primates. So apes as a whole also include gibbons. But then we have the great apes, which are large-bodied, tailless primates that includes orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. And we probably diverged as species from chimpanzees and bonobos around 6 million years ago. And then I think we need to fact check my numbers. I think that it's sort of around 9 million for gorillas and around 12 million for orangutans. I want to fact check those.
Totally fair.
But yeah, so we are most closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos, and then more distantly related to gorillas, and then even more distantly to orangutans. Yes, I was not too bad, actually. So 4.5 to 6 million years ago for chimpanzees and bonobos, 6 to 8 million years ago for gorillas, and then 12 to 16 for orangutans.
Yeah, that was honestly right on the nose. So I have a few different things I want to ask all at once. I guess the first thing I want to ask is why study like no, I think I'm going to pursue the species thing first. So one thing I want, you're like, species aren't really real, which is something that I think you realize very quickly if you've taken any biology classes, but it might be a kind of unfamiliar concept because you're like, well, no, of course species exist. Like dogs and me are different from each other. And it's like, yeah, but the way that you categorize, the way that, for example, like if you're like, okay, coyotes and dogs, not the same species. What about a coyote dog hybrid? Like we start getting like into like these really weird, weedy areas, and it's like, what is really a species? And then you start getting really philosophical and sad, and you just table the discussion and you move on.
Yeah. Yeah, because you have sort of a traditional view on species, which might be two individuals that could not produce a viable offspring together. So, like a horse and a cow could not reproduce together, they're separate species. A horse and a donkey, they can produce an offspring, but that offspring cannot then reproduce. So that's sort of, these are like ways of judging. So then, but then when you're talking about, yeah, like dogs and coyotes or dogs and wolves, where they can hybridize, that gets really murky, right? And then there are other organisms like orchids, various fungi, where every individual might be a different species. And species will cross-fertilize. And so it seems quite simple when we're talking about mammals, and in a lot of ways maybe it is a bit clearer. But I mean, chimpanzees and bonobos, like we don't know. They may have been historically housed in zoos together. There may be bonobo chimpanzee hybrids. But for our purposes, we treat them as separate species. And I think largely that's helpful because their social lives and their physiology is quite different from one another.
Yeah. Can you kind of describe, I think a lot of people have heard of chimpanzees, and I think if people have heard of bonobos, I think the thing that they think of is they think of them as sex monkeys. At least that is what anyone who I've ever brought up bonobos to has said. Either that or the male fashion company.
Yeah. Or the electronic musical artist.
Yep, exactly. They're just, for whatever reason, not as well known as chimpanzees. So can you talk a little bit about the social differences between bonobos and chimps?
Yeah, I mean, part of why they aren't as well known as chimpanzees is because they're only found in quite a small region south of the Congo River. And they were probably an isolated population of chimpanzees that managed to cross the river at a point when it was lower than it currently is, and then got separated. And they physically tend to be a little bit smaller than chimpanzees. There isn't as much dimorphism, so that's like differences between the sexes. So there isn't such pronounced differences in body size between male and female bonobos. The infant bonobos, so infant chimpanzees, have these like pink rubbery faces that I think look quite strange as a bonobo researcher, because bonobos have like dark skin from when they're born. And bonobos keep this like these pink lips and like white tail fluffs into adulthood, which is quite cute too. But yeah, the big difference is they're social. And there is a lot of range in chimpanzees, so I don't want to draw a huge opposition between bonobos and chimpanzees. But bonobos, the females tend to be much more central in the group, and the highest ranking individual is often the oldest female in the group. And yeah, the bonobos, so the females get along and facilitate their social relationships with Gigi rubbing, which is a female-female sexual behavior where they rub their genitals together. So that's where they get their reputation from as the sex monkeys, although technically not monkeys.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, that's perfect. So circling back to my other thread of questions, which is you study gestures and you study apes, great apes. Why do that? Like, what are you hoping to get out of that?
There are kind of two ways of approaching questions of how certain behavior evolve. And one of them is to look at species that exhibit similar behavior, but are distantly related. And so that would be looking at convergent evolution. So maybe looking at sequences in bird song, in whale communication, to understand human language, because they are showing in these distantly related species similar ways of combining signals. And so we then look, okay, it's probably not our relatedness to them that tells us something about that ability, but something in their social lives and something in their cognition that is similar to ours. So that's one way, is looking for distantly related species with similar abilities. But I take the approach of looking at closely related species with a shared phylogeny, so a shared ancestry. And this is part of what we got at a bit earlier, is if this ability is present in bonobos and in chimpanzees and in gorillas and in orangutans, it's very likely that it was present in our last common ancestor. And so I'm getting at questions of how human language evolved by looking at closely related species and seeing what their abilities are and how those types of abilities might have scaffolded human language.
And that's I think your central research question. At least that's what I believe to be your central research question after reading all of your articles that are open access, which is most of them, if anyone is curious. I'll put a link.
And if any, I think most of them are, and if any aren't, you can always email me. I'm happy to share.
I think I feel like that's true of everyone. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like people get really caught up in the like, oh, I have to pay $40 to access this article. A lot of times you can just email the original researcher and they'll just send it to you. People are so nice.
Yeah. And if you have any questions too, email's always open. Like any follow-ups. Yeah. No, it's great. I really enjoy it. And that's like one of the exciting bits of doing research, is talking to people about it.
So yes. I have so many questions about the things that I read, but one of the really interesting things that you say, or that I saw in your articles, is that there are some gestures that seem to be kind of the same across multiple species. First, can you describe some of those gestures, and then can you kind of talk about what that might mean?
There are so many gestures that are shared between bonobos and chimpanzees. I think depending on how we categorize them, again, this is species aren't real. Gesture types maybe also not real, but on a similar gradation. But categorizing them is helpful. And we think that chimpanzees and bonobos use around 80 gesture types. These might be things like raising their arm, reaching forward. They do a sort of big exaggerated scratching. They will shake branches. So there's around 80 of these actions that they do. And bonobos and chimpanzees, around like 90% of the gestures are shared. And we think that might be even higher if we look at more populations, which is what our research group is currently doing. It's more likely that this missing piece is something that we'll find in other populations, and that it might represent population differences rather than species differences. But there is this huge overlap in the gestures that they're using. And so, again, coming back to this like last common ancestor, we're finding this big overlap of gestures used by chimpanzees and bonobos. Like hominid ancestors may have had access to that same gestural repertoire.
Yeah. Another thing I saw that was interesting was that there's also overlap with some of the other apes, right? So it's like up to like 50 or 60% of the same gestures are also seen in orangutans. And it's higher for gorillas. It was something like 70 or 80%.
Yeah, and those estimates were from previously published research by other groups. And now in Kat Hobater's lab, where I'm working at the moment, we are directly collecting data on mountain gorillas, on a number of chimpanzee populations in East and West Africa, and are building a bigger data set. And we think that the overlap is probably actually quite a bit higher because we're comparing directly rather than pulling it from the literature.
That's so cool. And okay, so this is also really interesting because the gestures, if they are the same across species, that's really interesting because if you think about gestures that humans have, maybe we do have some that are common across all cultures, but a lot of our gestures are not common. Like there's some movements that you can make that are totally fine in some cultures and in other cultures are very offensive.
Yeah, and I think this maybe gets at a little bit in the differences of how gesture is acquired for humans and for non-human great apes, because we do learn so many conventionalized gestures, is what we call them. So they're created in a similar process that words are created, where we all agree that the meaning of like holding up my middle finger it has like this specific meaning, even though it's arbitrary, right? The finger itself doesn't mean anything on its own. It's something that we have come to agree means a certain thing.
So tactful.
I was like, I'm not sure what this podcast is rated. A certain thing.
Yeah, but so one of the other interesting things too, though, is that some of the gestures that non-human apes have are things that we also see in babies, human babies.
Yeah, there's a really cool paper by Kirsty et al. Where they look at like 1 to 2-year-old infants and find they use a lot of the great ape gestures. And we're doing some more research now with collaborators like internationally and are hoping to expand on that research a bit. But yeah, it's kind of, we're taking that approach to get at whether humans might still use great ape gestures, but they then later become masked by the way that we use language and the way that we use like co-speech and co-sign gesture and conventional gestures as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so for an example of one of the ones that we share is I'm sure everyone who's ever seen a little kid has seen them do this. They stick their hand out in front of them and they kind of like make a grasping motion to show that they want something. That's something that we share with our ape friends.
Yeah. There's another one where I need to figure out how to describe this, where they will, I mean, if I tell you they shoo someone else away, like I think you can probably picture, it's like we call it a hand fling gesture. And it's this motion where your hand is like dismissing another individual. And they use this to tell others to move away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so cool. I hadn't really ever thought about that kind of overlap. And I really had no idea that there was like a common gestural language, I guess, across our closest living relatives, which is super cool.
Yeah. And I think it brings up more questions, right? Because like, what is it about this gestural communication system that is shared? Is there, like, are there genes that encode for each of these gesture types? Is this an ability to like understand like a more embodied communication system where you understand that this is an individual with similar like social goals and you're able to use a signal that seems to make sense? I mean, there's a nice paper by Hobater and Byrne where they kind of break down what are the chances of gestures overlap of gestures overlapping if we were able to do all of the different movements with all of the different body parts. And that's like thousands of gesture options, right? So we're thinking of this gesture space where, like, what are the options available to you as a great ape? You can raise your arm, you can swing your arm, you can shake your arm, like, you can, like, what are all of these possible movement combinations if we're pairing actions and body parts? And there's like thousands of ways to move your body, but it gets narrowed down to this like less than 100 gesture repertoire. And so what is it about that? Like, are those gestures that make sense for these things? I mean, it's this like, I don't know that we currently have the tools to unpick it, but thinking about what underlies the cognition of gestural communication is like very exciting.
Yeah, no, and it does bring up that very central question, which is, are these gestures learned, or are they somehow biologically encoded? And how do you figure that out?
Yeah, lots of data, like huge data sets and collaboration, right? Because I think there's some nice, Helena and Rossano have a nice paper where they track the development of just a couple of gesture types. And it's like, how does this gesture type emerge? Because there's this theory of ontogenetic ritualization, which is that gestures could be acquired by moving from like the action. So, like being picked up by your mother. And by being picked up by your mother enough times, you eventually narrow this down to you just have to reach up and she knows to pick you up instead of you like climbing on and grasping on, and vice versa. So these gestures start from effective actions and then become ritualized into like shorter and shorter versions that we recognize as gestures. And they've tracked this for a couple of gesture types, but that's a really extensive process for a repertoire of like 70 to 100 gestures. And so I don't know how likely it is to explain the whole repertoire, and that maybe there's some other social learning mechanism in there. I don't think we've ruled out other social learning mechanisms. I just don't think that ritualizing each gesture one by one is maybe the easiest way to do it.
Sorry, I forgot I owned a dog for a second, and I heard something walking towards me, and I was like, "What is it?" Here you go, Ro. Go on, hop up. You're an athlete. Here you go. Woke up.
No.
She's about to go back to sleep again.
Does she understand your gestures?
Yeah, so she has a few that I've taught her though. So raising my hand up means sit. Flat palm open towards her means wait and hold still exactly where you are, which is really important when we go hiking on mountain biking trails because she has zero sense of self-preservation and will walk in front of a bike. She knows down. She doesn't like to do it because someone, somewhere, I guess, I don't really know, but her version of down is she flings herself on her back with all 4 feet in the air. And I'm like, no one asked for such a dramatic down. Like, I just want you to lay down like a normal dog.
I love that.
Which it makes sense why she doesn't want to do down that often, because it like puts her in a super vulnerable spot. But again, no one asked her that. But yeah, no. And the other thing that she knows a lot of are She knows a lot of words. And that was something that your research also looks at is there is like a lot of like vocal communication in ape species, but that seems to be like a lot like humans. It seems to be a lot more varied across groups.
Yeah, I mean, bonobo vocalizations are, I think probably most people listening to this podcast will be somewhat familiar with like chimpanzee vocalizations. They could probably like pick out a pant hoot or something. They're like, and like that builds up to a scream that I'm not going to do because you're relaxing listening to a podcast. But bonobos, when I first approached a group of bonobos, I was like, there are so many birds in this forest. They are high, whistling, squeaking. Like their most commonly used vocalization is called a peep. And it's exactly like beep. And they do like, it's like, and it's so different from chimpanzees. I think that's a huge like area of interest, right? Because their gestures are really similar, but their vocalizations very different. And we know, I would say, relatively little about bonobo vocalizations. They haven't been as well studied. Zana Clay has some work on how they combine vocalizations, which is quite nice. Again, getting at like evolution of language and how signals are combined with one another. But yeah, the vocalizations that they use are quite different.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this just comes down to stuff that I have never thought about before, but that totally makes sense, which is that with the vocalizations, you can get a lot of information about the person or the animal, the person animal, personhood. I'm so sorry. It's very early. The
That's fine. I regularly call them people accidentally.
the individual that is making the vocalizations, like you can get like mood, you can get location, but you can also get some other interesting things like identity, if there's any like predators nearby, kind of like relationships in between the vocalizer and the individual listening.
Yeah. I'm trying to like, there's so many good references for this, and I'm trying to like do some like Google Scholar searching as we're talking about this, because there's some really cool recent research. I'm thinking of research by Adrian Soldati and others looking at like information in pant hoots. And there's like, because a pant hoot, so this, it's quite it can be considered a sequence within itself, right? It's got these different parts to it where there's a build up and then a climax and then a letdown in this vocalization. And there can be a lot of individual information encoded in that, but that can also be suppressed. And so there's evidence that you can, and I think there's also a drumming paper on this where you can choose, chimpanzees can choose whether they're giving away like this individual signature or not. And that maybe this depends on who is present. This is like just enough outside my area that I'm checking in. But yeah, there's a new paper by Adrian Soldati et al. That's very cool, looking at audience sensitivity to these sort of pant hoot displays. And I'm going to find a chimpanzee drumming paper to recommend. But yeah, it's very cool. They definitely have this sense of like individuality and like keeping track of individuals within their social groups.
Yeah. Well, and so then the other thing is that there's also overlap, right, between gestural communication and vocal communication. And when I say overlap, I mean like as I'm talking to you, I am moving my hands. And apes also speak and use gestures at the same time. So it's such a rich area of research. I don't even know where I would start, and it's so exciting.
Yeah, it's so cool. So the drumming paper I was thinking about is Vesta Eleuteri's one on form and function of chimpanzee buttress drumming. So it's this, like, they will run up to these big buttress roots on trees and like hammer them with their fists or their feet and create these drums. And it's often part of a display that includes pant hoots as well, but they can encode individual like identity in those as well.
And why would they do that?
It might be part of letting others know, like, hey, Kirsty's here. And I think that sort of there's often chimpanzees form fission fusion groups. So they're part of a bigger group, but they'll separate into smaller parties for foraging. And so sometimes you want to let your friends know where you are. And I think often it's as simple as that. And quite a lot of animals have contact calls. Like my guinea pigs do it too, that it's kind of like they're wandering around and they'll just be like, beep, 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 beep. And macaques do it. And it's kind of like almost this like radar system where you're aware of where your group members are as you're foraging in wider areas.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Okay, so wait, I do have some questions actually about the way that you do your research, because one of the things that you mentioned is that there are studies that have been done on captive animals, but it's difficult because like their social and ecological environment are so different than what you have in the wild. So I know that you spend a lot of time out in the woods.
Yeah, my main research with bonobos has been at Wamba in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but I've also worked with chimpanzees at Kalinzu in Uganda and Sulawesi crested macaques at Tankoko in Indonesia. And these are habituated research groups. So they slowly learn over the course of people following them that people aren't to be feared. They get used to our presence. And so we're able to follow them. And I would say a safe range. Also, just general public service announcement not to approach wildlife. But these habituated research groups, even though they are habituated, we still make sure to maintain distance from them. And I would say I'm never closer than 5 meters, but usually sort of within 10 meters of filming the bonobos. Yeah, and my work uses a lot of video footage, so I'm sort of constantly filming them and trying to catch when the social behavior is going to start, which I think is the unique challenge. Like, because gestures initiate behavior, you're trying to anticipate, okay, there's 2 individuals getting closer to each other, so I'm going to start filming now in case something starts to happen.
That's so cool. And also it like how different research is now that we have digital cameras.
Yeah, and like storage. It's like not an exciting topic, but being able to have a hard drive that stores several terabytes is huge for field work. Like to be able to collect video footage and like that much of it, and to have a lasting record that other researchers can use and can confirm, like it means so much for science replicability and collaboration. It's very cool.
Yeah. It's one of those things that it's not necessarily like a sexy topic, but like the more you think about it, the cooler it gets.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about like what your field experience is like? I do have quite a few students who listen, and they are very curious about going out in the field and what that's like.
I guess sorry, I'm trying to think how to start to answer this question. I really love conducting field work. I guess I got into it in my undergrad. I did some like ecology field courses where we would go to the river or go into the woods nearby and do some sampling. And I guess primate field work is located in tropical countries mostly because of the primate range, although there are Himalayan langurs and Japanese macaques and other sort of colder weather primates. But mostly it's very hot. So I always take a little bit of time to get used to living somewhere hot. As we started this episode, I'm currently living somewhere where it's dark and cold at 4 p.m. So I think, yeah, fieldwork experience is the first 2 weeks getting used to warmer temperatures. But then, I don't know, generally I really like it. It's very, I still can't believe that I have a job where I can follow other species all day and like watch them, and that's what I get to do for work. Obviously, there are also physical challenges, I guess, of the long working days. I don't know, homesickness and distance from like family and friends. But overall, I really, really like it.
Yeah. Is it kind of like an established base camp, or do you just camp out, or what's that like?
It depends a bit on the field site. So where I was most recently in Indonesia was pretty close to a small town. And so I don't know, I could go to like a hotel for a beer once in a while, which is a nice way to unwind. It was also like on a beach. So I don't know. It was like I could get back and go for a swim. It was pretty, yeah, the location was pretty ideal. But then other field sites you might be using like a bucket shower and have like long drop toilets. So like facilities vary a lot. But where I've stayed, it has been at like, yeah, you have like an established, like, this is the research station. It may or may not be in a town or close to a town, and then go from there.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I feel like we have recently had a lot of people on who are more like lab based, right? So it's like a lot of like forensic anthropologists who, I don't know, they go out in the field too sometimes, but their field work's a little bit more grim. But you know, it's or like people who do endocrinology stuff, which is all super cool, but it's like a lot less time out in the woods, which is a super cool place to be. I like it.
Yeah, it's really nice. Also, like, if you get far enough out, like, you can't check your emails.
That is 100% why I go on at least 2 camping vacations per year, because I'm like, oh, sorry, out of contact. Y'all have to figure it out without me. It's so good. It's so restful. Speaking of email and other things, I do want to be respectful of your time. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish that I had asked you, that there's something that you want to say that I didn't get around to asking?
Well, I guess depending on when this podcast comes out, I have a new paper coming out that is pretty exciting about how humans understand great ape gestures.
That sounds super interesting. This podcast will probably go out in, my guess is like January or February.
It will almost certainly be out by then. You may have heard of this awesome new paper that's recently been published. Yeah. Yeah, so as of recording in December, it's been accepted in PLOS Biology, and it's this paper where we did an online study showing people videos of the most commonly used great ape gestures and asking them what they think the gestures mean. And this was kind of meant to be a first like proof of concept. And we were hoping to get a couple of hundred participants, maybe. It coincided with a time where Kat and I were doing a couple of radio interviews, and we ended up getting 15,000 participants.
Holy crap.
Yeah. And of those, a little over 5,000 completed the whole experiment. And we found that people are pretty good at assigning the meanings of great ape gestures. So this is like another way of getting at whether we still have this repertoire, right? Because you can look at the kids who haven't yet acquired other gestures through learning, but you can also ask adults how they interpret and see. It's a bit like a playback experiment, right? Or like a match to sample experiment where you're showing them the signal and asking like, what does it mean? And people are better than expected by chance. Like people were pretty good at assigning meanings of gestures, and even better for the gestures that have like a tight single meaning than those that have ambiguous meanings. So yeah, it's like exciting first bit of research. We have some follow-up studies that we're working on to see what is it about these gestures that people understand. Like, does it matter? Are they making assumptions based on it being a chimpanzee and a bonobo making these gestures? If we do it with a human performer, will they still get the gesture meanings right? If we do it with like, we're hoping to do it with just like skeletal models or like figures to really like strip down the amount of contextual information that people get. But yeah, the take home is that people can understand great ape gestures, and we're slowly going to figure out why and how.
That's so cool. Do you have like a favorite gesture?
It's probably the hand fling, the like go away gesture. But they do some. So bonobos, being the sex monkeys, hashtag not really a monkey, have some really good like flirting, like courting gestures. And they kind of exaggerate them. Like there are certain individuals who will do more ridiculous versions of them. And there's this one bonobo, Malusu, who does a like really exaggerated like rocking gesture. So it's like mostly they'll rock back and forth and maybe like thrust their hips. But he does this like full on like wiggling dance. And so for like one-off gestures, definitely Malusu's like dance rocking.
His come hither dance.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's, I have to say, not very effective, but it is fun to watch.
Poor Malusu. That's really funny. So final portion of the interview. I'm going to ask you about books / things that you're consuming. The first question I have for you is, if someone wanted to learn more about your area of research, where would be a good place for them to start?
So in terms of books, I really like Adam Rutherford's work. I think I would recommend The Book of Humans as a starting point. It includes quite a bit on like gesture and communication and also tool use, and I think is done in a really nice, accessible way, which, you know, is difficult for pop science. And I think Adam Rutherford does a good job of it.
Awesome. Perfect. Second question is, what are you reading for work right now?
I'm not reading. Oh, I'm kind of reading for work. I was going to say I'm not reading a book for work, which my partner's a geographer and is constantly reading books and for work. And I'm like, a lot of my stuff is in articles. And so I'm like on the article train, but I am reading Donna Haraway's Primate Visions as part of a book club. And I think I'm really enjoying it. And I am glad to be reading it at this moment, I think, rather than earlier in my career before I had a grasp of like social science writing as well. Sorry, maybe I should describe what Primate Visions is. So it's a book that examines whether primatology is a feminist science.
Interesting.
And so it draws on work by primatologists like Sarah Hardy and others who are explicitly feminist, and also primatologists who are women but don't explicitly bring feminism into their work, and asks what, like, as a whole, whether primatology can be considered feminist.
That's a really, I could actually just spend an entire episode talking about that. That's a really interesting.
Yeah, it's good. If you want to come to our book club, let me know.
It depends what time of the day it is. I'm in California. And then final question is, are you reading or consuming anything for fun right now? That can be like obviously a book or TV series, or sometimes people say like they're hiking.
I am reading, sorry, I need to get the title right. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers.
I love that book so much.
Oh my goodness. It has been recommended to me so many times, and I'm waiting for my copy of Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and I'm very excited for that. And in the meantime, yeah, it's like my little sci-fi moment.
I love that.
And also, like, I think it's very fun. We have been talking with other researchers about robot and AI communication, but also alien communication. And I think the relevance for understanding non-human primate communication to thinking about how we would interpret alien communication, super cool.
Yeah. I love Becky Chambers. I love that whole series. The last book in the series is Record of a Spaceborne Few, and I think that one's my favorite. But sorry, I love sci-fi. So I also recommended Hail Mary to someone last night.
Ooh,
which
haven't heard of it.
It's oh gosh, what's the name of the author? He wrote The Martian. I can't remember. Same author. Anyway, most of that book is about a human learning how to communicate with an alien, and it's so interesting and
cool. I will add it to the list.
Please do. I also clearly have my own little sci-fi.
Maybe we need a sci-fi book club too.
I'd be so into it. Oh my gosh, I would love that. So no one else. So I work with a bunch of ex-English majors, and they are lovely people, and they are all they read like literature. And I'm like, so I read this sci-fi book today. And they're like, okay.
Normalize sci-fi as literature.
Yes, exactly. I'm like, listen, it's got all the same themes. It's just much more excitingly written. So yeah, I would totally join your sci-fi book club. That is it. So I thank you so much. This has been such a lovely conversation, as per usual.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You are welcome back. Absolutely anytime. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.